thanks a ton for joining our session this morning. My name is Chris Fabian, and I'm with ResourceX. And with me today, Sama, if you'll give a wave, that's Sama Fox from the city of Littleton, assistant to the city manager. And today we're talking about applying resource reallocation and maximization for the spirit of the Govapalooza conference today. So when Joel Carnes was talking about what Govapalooza is all about, right? He was trying to create a South by Southwest themed experience for local government. And his premise was, how can we create space to celebrate the best and most innovative that local government has to offer, to really celebrate our work and bring some case studies to center stage. So in that spirit, I don't know how many of you have actually been to South by Southwest, but it is a raucous event, and it means a great deal to be center stage. And so, of course, who else would we bring? If we zoom in close enough, you can see that's Sama. That's 2018, City of Littleton, center stage, South by Southwest. So we brought the big guns today, and we're really excited. And this is what it's going to be all about. Another brand promise of South by Southwest is dedicating itself as an event to helping creative people to achieve their goals. You are our audience, you are our creative people. We've been longtime Alliance for Innovation members. We believe in the spirit of transformation that AFI is all about, and we hope we can deliver on this brand promise of helping you all achieve your goals overall. And for today, we have a very specific type of skill set to celebrate, and that is what we call resource reallocation and maximization. If you see the chart that I'm highlighting here, this is our very definition of customer success, of who we're working with and what we're trying to become. There are 4 primary skill sets that we're focused on through our work in priority-based budgeting. One is communicating at a program level and where that can take organizations. The second, what we'll talk about today, is what it means to reallocate resources, to take our budget and think about spending it in new ways towards future goals. The third, which we'll talk about on Thursday, we have a session on Thursday about fueling resources towards the results of tomorrow. And the fourth in green is how to leverage all of your community's resources, really looking outside of your organization and thinking about partners who you could tap into their budgets and aim them towards the results that we share across the community. We want to really focus on resource reallocation and maximization because that is what Littleton has mastered. And as you see our little icon for the Proficiency and Mastery 2020, we actually published an annual report this year to try to bring attention to the local governments who are mastering these skill sets overall. So Liz or Eric, as you have a chance to drop into the chat box the annual report for anybody who wants to read a little bit more about these local governments who are achieving mastery, it's one of the things that we wanted to share today. But let's talk a little bit about what we mean by resource reallocation and maximization. We started to draw attention to this back in 2018, 2019, when at our annual conference for priority-based budgeting implementers, we highlighted approximately 10 organizations who, for the very first time, were able to demonstrate that they were defunding, providing some services more efficiently, partnering in creative ways, or getting out of particular services altogether in order to free up scarce resources and aim them towards new programs, new investments that we have to make. And this was inspirational to us to see that it could be done. In 2020, heading into the beginning of this year, we actually looked at year-over-year resource reallocation among organizations who are measuring it. And as you see, Littleton is definitely among our top performers, as is KCK, Unified Government, in this practice of what you might think of as resource liquidity. And I just wanted to take one moment to talk about why it matters and why it belongs in the South by Southwest Govapalooza conference. You take a mega result in the top left, like many of our organizations are talking about climate action. And you can Google this, you can go online and see, like, what's the price tag for solving climate action? solving climate change. And you'll get estimates roughly of 300 billion might be required to flatten the curve. In other words, not making it any worse than it is today, all the way up to like 3.8 trillion for worldwide success in achieving an energy transformation overall. So you take these large numbers and we think about, well, how does local government tackle something like this? Well, between local and state government on a year-to-year basis, you can Google this as well. You can see that across the United States alone, state governments' total budgets amount to something like 1.4 trillion, where local governments are around 1.6 trillion. So maybe all in total, we have about $3 trillion headed towards all of the programs and services that we have to provide. And if you calculated a mere 5% of that 3 trillion or 10%, you start to see the amount of resources that we could amass on an annual basis to tackle mega problems like climate change or any of the other grand challenges that we face. And if you can get good at this, if we as local government can master the skill set of freeing up resources and pointing them towards the new results that we need to tackle, it actually starts to look ambitious, but achievable. And so as we start to think about Littleton's story and what they are doing in terms of freeing up resources to fund their particular results, it's this spirit, it's this value that we are espousing. And it's definitely a skill set that can be learned. My last slide before turning it over to center stage for Sama, this comes from our annual report. And you see an image in the top right called the blueprint. And the blueprint is kind of like a balanced equation. The left-hand side of the blueprint represents where we need resources to flow. Hey, we need to fund climate change. We need to fund equity. We need to fund new capital projects. And the right-hand side of the balanced equation here in the blueprint is where we can find opportunities to source programs differently, maybe provide them more efficiently. Where can we find opportunities to free up those resources and get them to the left-hand side of the blueprint. Littleton has been applying PBB now for several years. You see City Manager Mark Ralph, many of you might know Mark. You'll certainly get to know Sama today. This is not something that happened overnight, but you start to see how cool it is over time. This is a chart, and I know Sama has this in her slides as well, where for every program that you're seeing here on the left-hand side that they provide, they are identifying where they are decreasing service levels, where service levels are maintained, where some programs are being eliminated or provided more efficiently, or even by way of partnership, along with the resource implication and the description and rationale. We think this is super cool. And with that, I want to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Sama talk about how it's done.
Thank you, Chris. So while I'm sharing my screen, if you could just in the chat, tell us a little bit about where you're from. What's your position? What type of organization? Are you county? Are you a city? Are you special district? And then maybe what department, because that is all very interesting as we work through priority-based budgeting here. Okay, can we see my screen now? Perfect. So I'm Sama Fox, as Chris said, from the city of Littleton. I'm the assistant to the city manager there. I've been with the city for about 5 years. I've been in this position for 3. And one of the first things I was tasked with was applying priority-based budgeting. I would be completely remiss if I told you that we just started in 2020 and everything went smooth and we were able to reallocate resources. It's a path. It's definitely a journey. So I want to give you a little bit of our baseline. So this is a picture of our main street. We are a suburb south of Denver on the Front Range. We were having a lot of organizational change. So we underwent a city manager transition. We were transitioning a fire partnership that we administered to a special district. We had a lot of people who were longtime employees who were retiring out of our organization. We also went through a significant council change, very different goals and desires between 2 councils. We had budget challenges and we had a need to build community trust. So that's when we started working on this. How do we show people we're being good stewards? Very early on in this process, our new city manager introduced a leadership framework. And we always look to other cities. So this might look familiar if you followed other cities' paths, but the heart of this is vision, mission, and values. This is our organizational development and culture work that our HR department is really doing. At the top of this is our community and city council values and vision. And we recently launched an Envision Littleton initiative, which did a community vision, our first comprehensive plan in almost 40 years, our first ever transportation master plan, and are in the midst of a full-scale code update right now. So we take that vision, we put it into strategic planning, and we tie all of this into priority-based budgeting, where we are able to rank our programs based on the community and internal values, and then allocate resources appropriately. That gets built into our service and delivery plans, individual goals, measurement analysis. You know, we're at a point where we're now doing 2-year dashboards for council as they see their goals being implemented. We're doing a data inventory. We're doing all of this at once, and we're continuing to improve processes as we go forward. Now, as I hinted, we are doing all of this at once. So we are really building the plane while we're flying in here, as our city manager likes to say. We all have a piece of this, and we're working very hard in everything we do to integrate all of these elements. So as we talk about PBB, you'll notice we're flexing muscles for other parts of that leadership framework so we can bring it all together. So year one, we started in 2018. Tears to Tacos is a true story. So we immediately needed to identify all of our programs and services, what our results were going to be that we score these on, so what our vision and values are, and then go through scoring. And that was our goal for year one. We actually had the great opportunity once we did that to partner with a neighboring city who had done PBB and match up all of our programs to see where we had opportunities and alignments so we could have efficiencies between the two of us, which was fantastic. But getting started, we quickly realized that myself from the city manager's office and the deputy finance director were not going to be able to do this alone. This is not something you can do in a bubble. So we started an all-star team. We got people from all departments of the city and all levels of the organization, about 40 people in total, pulled them together, worked with their leadership and supervisors to have dedicated time for this project, and they took us all the way through this. So they identified programs, they did the first scoring, they did peer review for scoring. It was very important to acknowledge emotions in this. So remember, our city is not in the greatest place as we're working through this. We're losing a fire partnership, we've undergone staffing changes, people think that maybe you're going to take away their job. So we had to keep sort of persevering with that. What is this? This is documenting our programs and services. This is not judging. This is taking the baseline. This is what we have. And being a little bit flexible as we moved through things, right? We found that some deadlines had to be adjusted because there were other things in the organization going on. And so continuing to have that open dialogue with people, continuing to have the process be impacted by both the all-star team and the leadership team really helped us through that first year. And this is our all-star team, just a subset of them. But this was at our taco party. And it was really, really an important thing because early on, we did have a leadership team member walk out of one of our trainings emotionally. And to be able to cap it off with a taco party where people are smiling, where we had music and fun, was a huge transition for us the first year. So the second year, we said, okay, we've got a baseline. We're going to start small, we promise. And then our council said, we want more. So we started with a Pick 3 program review, and I'll go into a little detail for this. But really the goal was to build on our data, build our team, and keep this going, right? Priority-based budgeting isn't a change to how you budget, it's a change to the culture, and it's part of our greater leadership framework that we're implementing. So we really did focus on building our team here. We hired our first ever budget analyst. We immediately found an opportunity with ResourceX to get them into a leadership training. And this is actually a photo of them after they presented at one of the ResourceX conferences. And while this photo might not look diverse, it's actually 4 departments, 3 generations, and 10 years at the city, ranging from 15 years to less than a year, which was important for us to keep the all-star team going. We're actually still keeping the all-star team going as we update and continue to use this. We also did regular council highlights. After the first quarter, We did have a council member walk out, but we gained traction from there on, and council decided they wanted to see more and more of this. So we pivoted and we incorporated this in the budget. I do want to tell you a little bit about our first program evaluation. So we were really flexing muscles here. We were trying to give the team a safe space to do this. So we said, you pick 2 programs. City manager's office will pick 1 program. So 3 programs for every department, pretty achievable. We supported them. So the all-star team still had that dedicated time, training, and support. The budget analyst, myself, and the deputy finance director were all very involved and happy to help people through these. We needed to give them something to work from though. And we really liked this blueprint. This is a little bigger picture of it that ResourceX had put together. So this really walks you through, you have needs, you've got options, you can either free up resources or generate new revenue. And then it walks you through 6 pieces. And so what we did was we built a worksheet for people. We said, okay, for your first phase as a team, just tell me about your program. Talk to the people who do this. Really think about what your program actually is. Because you'll find what people think is happening and what is actually happening is not always the same thing. Then we said, let's think critically. So we encourage people to pick programs that they wanted to change, find wins in here. But before you present the answer, let's think about all the options. We're flexing that sort of critical thinking muscle and giving our organization a safe space to explore opportunities that maybe people at different levels of the organization didn't feel they had before. So we worked through these, and then we translated these into budget highlights for our council. So these budget highlights were a single-page decision-making aid by program or service. They were intentionally not by department because we're trying to build those bridges across. A lot of our programs go across departments, and we want to see what that big picture looks like for better decision-making. We intentionally tied these to our Envision efforts. So these are connected to our vision. They're connected to our systems thinking efforts, where we're telling them who this is impacting, how it's working. And really, they're focused on service level. So for the first time in our organization, we're now saying, if we make this change, this is what you can expect for the service level, and this is what success looks like. Now, every organization has done this. We're putting it on paper with a framework behind it. Our council latched on. They really loved to see what this was. And it actually helped our staff with adoption as well, because now staff had a format to tell their story in. And so when before, sometimes it's hard for staff to align what they know is need with political considerations, they've got a framework, and they really latched on to this. So 2020, this is our 3rd year of priority-based budgeting. We were feeling pretty comfortable. We had learned from our processes. We had adjusted our forms and our timelines. We actually took a lot of agile practices in this. We realized that shorter, faster sprints are better for our team, and they allow us to be flexible as we go on. So we broke it into discrete sections. We've incorporated our vision, and COVID hits. We all know that was a huge impact. I don't need to tell this group about that, but we had to immediately pivot and identify how we were going to be accommodating for this change in services and reduction in revenue for our city. So for me, how do you make difficult decisions? With data, right? I've got a degree in economics. I'm a nerd. Data is comfortable and safe for me. And it was safe for our organization too. You know, this is an emotional time period, and having a framework for them, having something that supported their decisions rather than just being sort of a feeling or gut knowledge, was a safe space for people. It actually created a bit of a safety blanket. So we immediately started analyzing the opportunities. You know, priority-based budgeting has a series of results that you score every program on, and their system actually has policy questions tied to those results, where they tell you if there are a lot of other service providers in your area, if this is aligning low with your community's vision, maybe this is an opportunity for outsourcing or to reallocate resources. So we instantly pulled that information out of the system and put it together for people. We also looked to what other cities were doing. There are a lot of amazing people out there doing amazing things. And ResourceX highlighted Boise, Idaho's Essential Service Review, which we thought was a great format to use our data in a different way. So we pulled our PVB data out, we put it through this Essential Service Review, and then we were able to provide every department what appears to be essential, what appears to need to be in person, and what appears to be non-essential. And then we also looked for programmatic impacts. You have to remember, with any sort of change to how you're doing things, it's going to be an evolution. And defining your programs and refining your system is an art, not a science. So we're still really working on breaking down silos and connecting those programs. So when we had to reallocate resources, every department director was tasked with finding what those resources were and identifying what service levels were impacted. We provided them all three of these pieces of information out of the system in a single format and walked them through each one and what that meant with them, their teammates, whatever structure they wanted, to really give them the resources to help them make these decisions. Now, they all have access to the system, right? They could have looked and done this, but it's helpful sometimes to frame it for people and to provide it in a way that works for them. I can't say this enough, is there's no single right way to do things, right? The right way to do it is the way that your organization can do it and will do it. We also did an early retirement program in 2020. So incentivized voluntary early retirements. And this had a lot of impact. We really tried to focus these retirements on service reduction. So if someone on your team took that early retirement, then our budget analysts and HR partnered with the director and the supervisor to pull a list out of priority-based budgeting of all of the programs impacted by that position. So now you know what this retirement impacts, and very strategically worked as a team to say, this is what we can reallocate, this is a service we can reduce, this is an essential service, we might have to rehire for part or all of this position. And so they went through that sort of systematic analysis to get us to a point where we knew what we could reduce and what we had to replace. This was all happening behind the scenes. When it came time for budget, we needed to translate this for our council. And so our council was very familiar with that blueprint. So we built on the blueprint. We built on those programmatic highlights. And we really tied this to our process. So every material request had to go through priority-based budgeting analysis. And then what we provided to council was this table where like Chris said, you see the program, you see the blueprint item. Now you can't read this, you don't need to read this. I'm happy to send this to you if you want to see it. But there's a lot of items here on decreased service level. There's a lot of items for increasing efficiency. You can see exactly what that dollar impact was, a brief description. And then if it's a more material policy decision that council is going to have to make, we've also provided a budget highlight for them. These are not easy decisions, right? There's even a check in eliminating a program. We're still getting citizens talking to us about that program. But in a time of COVID, you've got to make these hard decisions. And it was really a comfort for staff and council to have a framework to be able to do it in. I think our biggest success over the last year, though, was the change to our culture. I mean, in 2020, priority-based budgeting became part of the vocabulary. It became regularly asked for by council when someone was bringing them a decision that impacted anything financial. It was regularly included in communications to council. We actually used priority-based budgeting to support our leadership retreat. So we underwent a reorganization where we created an executive team and sort of super departments under them. And we used this, we pulled these resources to say, here's how you can get to know your new team. Here's your top 5 programs. Here's whether they're internal or external. You're a new manager. Here's a list of the programs that your team members are working on so you can start to get to know these things. Now we've talked a lot. We do want to do a bit of an engagement opportunity here, and I think Chris is going to help me with this. So we are We are in person now. We thought we were only going to have chat capabilities, so it's very exciting that we can see your faces and you can pipe up. So please get ready to chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and respond or type in the chat. If you're in a group, take a moment to talk to each other about these things. If you're on your own, take a moment to think about each item. And then please share your insights in the chat, share your insights in person. This is just a little bit of insight into how we can use the data. So the first sort of fun thing is we want to talk about what kinds of things the city offers and what things you might not know about. So this exercise is called Spot the Fake. Our city offers all but one of these programs. And I'll tell you, if you go through an exercise of trying to map all of your programs, you will find things you did not know you offered. Do we have local history and genealogy? Do we have a pancake breakfast? Do we have a pea patch? Do we have a sheep to shawl? Do we do tree planting and sales? So let's just take a few seconds, think about that. If you're in a group, talk about it a little bit. Throw something in the chat. Let us know what you're seeing. And I actually can't see the chat right now. So Chris, let me know if people are chatting, please.
I'm watching the chat. No one's been bold enough to take their guess. Oh, Nathan Teal is the first one who guessed local history and genealogy. And then we have Ramon, sheep to shawl. We have a number of crowd favorites for sheep to shawl coming in.
All right. So it's actually the pancake breakfast. And we actually used priority-based budgeting to eliminate this program because we found it was only serving about 10 people every year, even though we were spending significant resources. We do have sheep to shawl. We actually have a living history museum with sheep. They're very cute every spring, where they have an event where they really take it from the sheep to a shawl. So one of the other things, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the sheep program are coming up across PBB organizations in a Canadian community called nearby Edmonton, Alberta. They have sheep grazing, which is a volunteer lawn mowing program, if you will, and it takes care of some of their weed problems as well.
Oh, that's
pretty
great.
cool. I was stumped, Sama.
Yep, you're going to find surprises. It's always interesting. So the other thing, and we've got a few examples here. This is where if you've got something that you're interested in, please feel free to speak up. But what are your top 5 programs? And this is something we did for our leadership team. We said, what are your top 5 programs that you're spending funding on? And what are your top 5 programs that you're placing personnel on? Because those might be 2 different things. So if we think about that, and I'll just give us an example here to start with. For our communications department, graphic design and production services, the top one they're spending money on. But videography is actually the top one they're spending people's time on. And that's videoing all of our meetings, doing those sort of spots the city does for education, all of that. You can see the Littleton report is our Littleton newsletter. We actually place more people on it than the finance side of things. So it's pretty interesting, right? Citizen engagement is not a top money spender, but is something we spend a top amount of time on. So we've also got public works. And if any of you are out there, you're from these departments, shout out, what do you think the tops are? Do we have any public works employees here?
Snow plowing.
So yeah, so it's interesting, right? This one is very different. So the city actually partners with another city on a sewer plant, a wastewater treatment plant. So we spend a lot of finances on this plant. We don't actually have any personnel at the plant. So you can see our top 5 programs by expense don't quite match our top 5 programs by allocation. So this is an exercise we did with our leadership team. And this is our museum, just because the museum is interesting. So we've got living history, we've got artifact management and conservation. It just gives you a little insight into what you're doing and where you're placing your priorities. And then from here, you can sort of look, is this where we want it to be? Do we need to adjust this? So we also wanted to talk about what's your mix. Are you an internal service provider or an external service provider? And I've got a couple examples here. And so I want to start with communications. What do you all think? Do you think communications is more internal or external? Do you think they're all external? Give a shout out, put something in the chat. Seeing a lot of quietness. I'll get us started then.
We have both, some responses for both, some saying communications external, finance internal and external.
Yeah. So our communications is actually a pretty solid mix of external and internal. So 50% external, 44% internal. And if you think of our communications department houses graphic design, it houses our community education, but also some of our internal education. Finance is almost entirely internal. We do have external programs in finance, right? We've got utility billing, we've got senior refunds, but almost all internal. And what was interesting about this is when we showed this to our leadership team, they didn't all agree with where their pieces were. So it was a great opportunity for us to take a step back and say, okay, are we evaluating our programs right? Are we just different than we thought we were? It's nice to have that critical thinking moment for them. So I'm just going to wrap up a little bit. We want to leave plenty of time for question and answer since we have a lot of people here. But our year 4 is staying the course. And this is our budget message this year. And staying the course does not mean hard and fast. One way is right. Staying the course means continuing to implement that leadership framework, continuing the journey to data-driven decisions, continuing to dedicate ourselves to using priority-based budgeting, and continuing to be flexible and adaptable, continuing to connect everything. And then because this is always what I want as a takeaway from these sessions, here are my tips. Here's how we got through. You have to have support from the top. That's your chief executive, that's your leadership team, all of them. You've got to support. You need to have engagement across the organization. I don't know what the front line of public works is doing. I've ridden a snowplow. I can't speak to all of their programs, but they can. They can come in and they can tell me what they're doing, what they're spending their time on. Other keys for us were to start reasonably and meaningfully. So take meaningful, small steps each way, right? This is a transition for the organization. Doesn't have to all happen overnight. Just celebrate all the time. Highlight people to their leadership team. Do shout outs at your team trainings and meetings. Do taco parties. Find a way that works for your group to celebrate their accomplishments, because when you look back, there's a lot of accomplishments. Be agile. Local government is dynamic. We're experiencing this right now. Actually, tonight we have a council goal setting meeting. This is our 4th meeting so far this year to set council goals, and they are very dynamic. Keep it up. Keep trying, keep going, keep evolving. And then what we really wish we had was a connection to our organizational values. If we could have connected that, I think that would have been a smoother process for us. So I'm going to let Chris take over. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thanks, Emma. While I do the transition, we did have a question around what is P to Patch? What is that program?
That's a great question. So our P Patch is a community garden program.
A community gardening program?
Yes. So there are 2 community gardens where you can buy a plot and have your space to garden if you don't have a yard to garden
in. That is awesome. The host has stopped your sharing. Oh, I'm going to.
And if you have any other questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll try to do some face-to-face questions here in a minute too.
That's great. Also, while you were presenting and you brought up public works, there was a question around snow removal. And we actually, I remember when we used to be able to get together with other human beings. I was with the Littleton City Council. And if you've ever played the game at Halloween when you're a kid, like guess how many candy corns are in the jar, it was kind of like that, but it was with council members. Take a guess at how much the city invests in snow removal. And And I thought it was a really neat exercise because one, council members can, everybody knows snow removal. So many of you wrote it in the chat that you thought that was among the top programs for public works. But to see that the answers to the question varied by like orders of magnitude. Is it $100,000 program? Is it $1 million program? And it just goes to show how important it is to try to provide an answer to that gap in knowledge. What does it cost us? And I was just bringing up some of Littleton's data where we can go, and if we were intrigued with snow removal, because I was.
That's a great point, because in the line item budget, the personnel, the equipment, the actual treatment methods are all in separate places, and you don't necessarily see what the whole program costs as a bundle.
It's very cool. So here's snow removal by the program from Public Works, along with snow removal in overall fleet management, vehicle replacement, snow removal from a facilities perspective, making sure that they have grounds maintenance, taking care of snow at the museum complex, making sure the community gardens are snow free, most likely. So I mean, just kudos to Littleton for being able to get to this level of data creation, which is so neat. But I will go back to, I'll pick up exactly where Sama had left off on tips and bring us on home for the next few minutes. And then we did want to have some time for some open question and answer period for Sama, for sure. But what I wanted to think about is, you know, you come to appreciate what Littleton put together. They have created program level information. They have a cost for every program. They have aligned and evaluated every program in terms of the outcomes that they are hoping to achieve. And then they have used this data as they communicate various trade-off decisions for resource reallocation. And I wanted to kind of zoom out for the big picture for all of you to see the grand scope of what this can all be about. When we talk about program level communication, I'm sure the words make sense, but what does that really end up looking like? This comes from the annual report, and I just wanted to highlight some of these 4 sections. This is Fort Saskatchewan, which has the sheep grazing program, and this is how they're used to communicating budget information in the budget book. But what they have done in terms of their transition is to now pivot and communicate about programs and programmatic change in the budget book, and the line item detail is in the appendix. And as Sama was mentioning, how council has now become accustomed to asking for this PBB data, just think of what a nice breakthrough that is. It's easier to talk about. So here's Public Works, and we're talking about what is the year-to-year change in cemetery operations or snow removal or traffic lighting, and the basic descriptions of what that variance actually means and in the midst of the COVID impacts overall. So this is what Liz just linked into the chat is the Fort Saskatchewan story and what it can start to look like when you stop talking about line items and then decision-making revolves around programs. And it's such a simple twist. We did talk about the highlight of today, which is the city of Littleton, which is such a wonderful story. Another organization who excelled in resource reallocation and maximization is in the Wisconsin area. If any of you have followed what Washington County has been able to do, 3 years ago, very similar path as the city of Littleton. They went through priority-based budgeting and they were in a fiscally constrained environment. And some of their lower ranking programs in this organization matched up to their values came from the Parks Department. So elected officials engaging in this work asked a question that was appropriate. They said, well, we don't have enough money to go around. These programs in parks are taking up general fund resources, our general government reallocatable resources. Maybe we should think twice about staying in the parks business. What the Parks Department did was said, give us a chance to be entrepreneurial. We realize that we're over 90% subsidized by the general fund. we're going to embark upon a business plan to become fiscally sustainable. And over the course of 3 years, through park user fees, through other creative revenue generating opportunities, like creating beer in the parks, which nobody could object to. It's kind of like the pancake breakfast. Partnerships, sponsorships, naming rights, and general program efficiencies, applying the blueprint. 2021, as they adopted their budget, is the first year where parks has gone taken a complete reversal. They were nearly 100% subsidized by the general fund when they started, and now they are 100% financially independent. And again, that is in the spirit of the South by Southwest Festival, something to celebrate, that a department can make that kind of move. Yes, it took them 3 years, but it was a diligent focus on programmatic opportunities with their citizens to fund them in an alternative method. As we move into the third level of mastery, you start to think about, well, if we can get really good at resource reallocation, where might that lead us? What could we do with the resources that we're freeing up? And we have no shortage of things to do with the resources that we can free up. But we have organizations here like the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan, who is very inspiring as well, because they said, even in spite of the COVID impacts to our budget, we can't put the pause button on our climate action goals. They have a highly ambitious $1 billion plan. And so they use their programmatic evaluations, as Sama mentioned, and we will be highlighting Ann Arbor among other cities on Thursday, to say, okay, what are all of the different ways that we could free up and reallocate our current budget above and beyond the cutbacks that we have to make for COVID downfall. And here you can see 154 programmatic recommendations following the blueprint: program efficiency, cost recovery, partnerships, service level decrease, and that's how they've used their programmatic data overall. We mentioned Ann Arbor. The city of Pittsburgh just did the exact same approach, which, if the drum I'm trying to beat is, this is exactly what Sam and the city of Littleton did. They followed the blueprint, looking for these categories of program opportunity for efficiencies, for service level decreases, for partnerships, or for Washington County style entrepreneurial revenue generating ideas. In Pittsburgh, they came up with nearly 200 ideas, and about $41 million is on the table for programmatic opportunities to reallocate towards funding their climate action objectives overall. And finally, quite simply, the fourth level is, okay, you can reallocate all you want within your own budget, but there comes a point where the trade-offs get no better. You're decreasing funding for a high priority program in order to fund another high priority program, and the trade-off didn't get you anywhere better off than where you began. And so what would you do next? And as you think that far out into the future, you can imagine, well, at that point, you have optimized your own budget. How about tapping into the resources of other organizations? In South Jordan, Utah, this very simple example illustrates what we mean, where they have begun to tap into the resources of Salt Lake County to offload, in their case, a rec center, because Salt Lake County has taken on a position in their approach to service delivery, not unlike a 24-hour fitness. They own and operate rec centers all throughout the county. So South Jordan, from their perspective, they're saying, why wouldn't we allow them to take that on? And we get to free up our resources to refocus on something else. If you have been following GFOA at all, the Government Finance Officers Association, they have highlighted stories like this in a paper called Government as a Platform, plugging in the best service providers. It's all of this mindset of how do you begin to tap into public sector, private sector, and nonprofits in your community to free up your own resources and be able to reallocate towards the future. So I wanted to end there as we do talk about where can this all go. And Sam, I didn't know if you had any additional thoughts on even the future in Littleton. as we also begin to welcome some dialogue from our audience members.
Yeah, you know, the future in Littleton is continuing towards this path for our leadership framework and continuing to build those connections and helping people understand that this type of budgeting is not something that you just have to check off a list once a year and do. This is a living, breathing thing that we can incorporate and use in a lot of our decision-making processes. I really welcome questions, feedback from others. I did see a question about, are we going to do a public safety slide? I did not have that on the slides, but I think ResourceX did link to some of the public information available from our priority-based budgeting. So you're welcome to click into that. I think I would remind everyone that priority-based budgeting is a process. So your data and programs aren't going to be perfect the first time. It's always what it is, right? And so we're looking at 2019 information right now, actually early 2020 information. It's 2021, I have to remind myself what year it is. Any questions? So, I saw some examples. Go ahead.
I have a question. If we were going to start this in a small town, we have about 35,000 population, and if we were going to try to move to priority-based budgeting, what resources? I mean, would we kind of basically just go off the examples that you've shared, or are there resources that we can just say, hey, let me look at this and begin to just try it, right?
Yeah, so Chris can give you a lot more detail here. We signed up with ResourceX because they have a system, and because they have that system, they've got a world of examples. So one of the first things that we were able to do is show our teams what all the programs other cities were using so that they could have a place to sort of build their list from and weren't having to pick this out from thin air, which really helped them.
I appreciate that, Sama, and definitely appreciate the question as well. Liz, if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat, we also offer a training, and it gives organizations like yours an opportunity to at least get the greatest amount of education on the component parts, like what it takes to build a program inventory, and then some hands-on experiences, not too unlike Sama's game of spotting the fake, but to give you a real appreciation for what is the right level of program inventory identification, what's too small, what's too large. There's a program costing component of that training, a program scoring, how do you pull your results together and evaluate programs in order to rank them, and most importantly, a taking action on the data training, very similar to what Sama was describing in applying that blueprint to look for reallocation opportunities. Clearly, we would love to support any of you in your work to help you create those data layers and use our examples from other implementers in the community. But we also want to make sure you have access to as much publicly available information as possible for your own education.
I appreciate that. If I may just ask a really quick follow-up to that, is when would that process start? Is that at the beginning of the typical budget cycle, or do we really need to begin that kind of planning way earlier on?
Love Sama's perspective on that.
From the Littleton perspective, I think we tried to get ahead of our budget cycles so that we would have items in place before budget. I think we quickly realized, even though we implemented, we got through the programs, the costing, and the scoring in about 6 months. We weren't ready to use that for the first year of our budgeting cycle after it was implemented, because there was a lot of learning we still had to do. So we were sort of a year and a half to when we did it for the budget.
This is a crazy chart I want to show you. So we're always trying to push things faster in the organization, try ways for the organization to build data in a sustainable way, but also get there as fast as is appropriate. And I mentioned Pittsburgh earlier, and they really did have a crazy path to implementation of 3 months. Here's their cost allocation timeline. And I'm looking at Sam's eyebrows. This is what these little spikes were when the mayor's office wrote to staff and said, hey, your program inventories and your costs are due. And you can see the productivity surge towards 100%. This is like police department, fire department, getting all of their costs allocated. That was 23 departments in 3 months, spanning over Christmas and New Year's. I only offer that to let you know it can be done in a large city with a lot of work to do and COVID budget impacts. They still had their budget proposal to submit. At the same time, everything that Sam is describing about, you have to take it at an appropriate pace just to make sure you're getting your data ready in order to consider, can you apply it for an upcoming budget process is wise.
3 months is seriously impressive. And I would say if you're going to take something like that on, be conscious of what all your organization is taking on at once. We implemented priority-based budgeting while we were doing a vision and a comp plan and a transportation master plan, which puts the organization at some capacity issues.
So I had a question that I put in the chat. I was just curious, from a performance measurement standpoint, did Littleton already have a performance management type system, or was that a part of the process? Because, from my experience, oftentimes we have a lot of measures, but they're not necessarily all that organized.
Yeah, that's a great question. We did not. Now, some departments and some teams were using different types of measures in performance management. This is something that we are still working on implementing. We really started focusing on those service levels to try and get there. The importance for us is to not measure for the sake of measuring. So we've been working on service levels. We've used the sort of SMART acronym because that's what people are using for their performance evaluations. And so it was really helpful for them to think about setting service levels in a smart way and identifying success that way. And then we've been actually inventorying our software systems, and now we're initiating a data inventory to sort of help us identify what we have and keep building from there. So having true performance management and performance measures is a little ways away for us. We're working on an initiative with Public Works right now. And I would say for us, we're trying to lean as much as we can on the work that's out there. So if your Public Works, the American Association of Public Works has a lot of things. ICMA has some performance benchmarking, trying to find consistencies.
And then just one follow-up question on, I presume, your line item accounts, you didn't change those in order to address priority budgeting. So how did you compile the data or compile the accounts so that it easily flowed or identified your priorities, I guess, or your services, your programs?
Sure. So that is not necessarily easy for sure. So every year our finance department puts the line item budget into priority-based budgeting, and then our teams go through a costing exercise where they help identify what programs those line items go to. Now, some of them are easy, and you can say, yes, the tree planting line item goes to the tree planting program. Some of them we have to get a little bit more creative. And so there are ways to say split across these programs that are checked, or 30% here, 20% there. And we really rely on our all-star team to do that and do that as well as they can.
I think those are great questions, Nathan, as well. And I'll do a smaller version, a yes and to what Sama said. As it comes to performance measures, we have found that we do have several organizations who ultimately do incorporate performance measures at the program level. But I like how Sama described it. It's kind of like pick your order of operations, what comes first. And as you think about the value of doing any of this work, especially as it pertains to program evaluation and service level choices, and Sama's example of pancake breakfast, which they used to provide, whether or not you provide pancake breakfast likely has little to do about the performance measures of pancake breakfast. It is more about, is this the right business for us to be in? And so applying that blueprint, the first major opportunities that you have for choosing to be in one particular service area or finding a partnership overall can be done without necessarily having a performance measure for any given program. As you get further down the path, and all you have left are the highest priority of programs, and you do become concerned with, well, how can we provide this more efficiently? And how can we improve performance overall?
So just to follow up, Chris, I mean, I think the comment though that was made was that if we're going to be making a change in our budget and we're saying that this is a priority, at the end of the day, you're wanting to demonstrate what was the change that took place. And in order to do that, there has to be some type of, you almost have to have a measure of before and then a measure of after, right? And so that was my purpose and question. I realize it's not necessary, but at the same time, it kind of is, because without that, this is what we were before the program existed, and this is what we were after the program. We delivered on what we said we would deliver, is kind of a critical piece. Can you, and I'll be done after this question, can you talk a little bit about how you incorporated this into your strategic plan? Did you, if these priorities were coming from your council, how did you, was it just you check the box, this is connected to our strategic plan this way? How did you do that?
Yeah, happy to. So we have a community vision and a comprehensive plan now. We don't have a citywide strategic plan, but we're using that vision and comprehensive plan in place of that at the moment. What we did is each program is scored on a series of results, and we made our vision elements and our comprehensive plan goals those results. So when you're scoring your program, you're scoring it on environment or whatever that piece is that came out of the vision. I think we have about a minute left if there are any other questions. I do believe our contact information is in the chat, so feel free to reach out if you think of something later.
I was going to also show, let's do a program in museum, because we were looking at museum earlier. And we'll take living history just as an example. And I wanted to show, as Sama was describing, they scored every program relative to their Envision Littleton established results, as well as other what we call basic program attributes. Oh, snap, my page needs to reload. And I was just going to simply show, I think I won't get there in the time we have, how those scores took place. But Nathan, to your point, it wasn't like a yes or no, does this meet the strategic plan, but every result, like safe community, economic vitality, transportation, quality of life, and so on, you score the program based on its influence on a sliding scale towards every one of the results. Mm-hmm. And then there's a final composite score calculated, and the programs that rise to the top have the greatest degree of influence on the strategic plan versus the programs at the bottom have the least amount of alignment, is the simplicity.
Yeah, great explanation, Chris.
Thanks. Cool. Well, we are at the end of our time. I just want to say thanks to Sama for sharing your story. And thanks to everybody who came to join us. We really appreciate it. And if you have any other follow-up for Sama or I, please don't hesitate to be in contact, and enjoy the rest of your Govapalooza experience. But thank you, Sama. That was awesome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for coming.